I'm Betsy DeWitt from the Brookline League of Women Voters, and I welcome all to the warrant article discussion today, co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters and the Town Meeting Members Association. First, I want to just quick reminder that the League will be holding a special event next Wednesday, October 20th at 7 p.m., which will be focused on the history of Brookline and government with our local historians, Ken Liss and Heather and Greer Hardwick. If you want to join us, you need to send an email to erniefry@comcast.net in order to get the Zoom link. But I think it'll be a very interesting program and part of an ongoing series where the League is trying to sort of review the history of town government, and will also undertake to discuss questions like what is a charter and how do they work and things like that. Anyway, going forward, George Abbott White from the TMMA board, our co-sponsor, is with us today. And our agenda is to hear about a group of warrant articles on marijuana licensing and regulation. Massachusetts law has permitted several categories of legal marijuana consumption. Up to 6 plants can be grown in your home for personal use, and also for medical or recreational use sold by locally licensed dispensaries under the oversight of the State Cannabis Control Commission. A single purchase can be 1 ounce of flower product or 5 grams of concentrate. The legal age to purchase is 21, the same as for alcohol products. Also, any type of consumption of marijuana in public is illegal. The number and location of dispensaries is subject to local government regulation, and licensed dispensaries must sign a host agreement with the local municipality. The municipality then may assess a community impact fee of up to 3% of annual revenue for up to 5 years. In addition, there are the normal state excise, state and local sales taxes are also assessed. This program is being recorded. And just a reminder, it's not a debate. The petitioners are asked to explain the intent of the article and to be prepared to answer questions. So if you are interested in having a question answered, it helps if you'll put it in the chat, which is the little blurb at the bottom of the screen. And when we get to the end, when each speaker is finished, we'll take questions if there are any in the chat or from members in our actual audience. So then I think we will begin with the speaker and petitioner on Article 7, who has joined us. The Select Board Chair, Heather Hamilton, will speak on Article 7 and perhaps be assisted by also Select Board member John Van Scoyac, who is with us. So, Ms. Hamilton, you have the floor.
Thank you so much.
And you may share and have a screen share as well, if you like.
I didn't really have time to prepare a slide deck, so I'm just going to try to wing it.
Okay, wing away.
So how did we get here? Some people have been following this issue quite closely. So we in Brookline have 4 retailer marijuana dispensaries, and that has been coming online ever since there was a statewide referendum to legalize marijuana, I believe in 2016. So in the course of doing that, we were charting new regulation, and it was mostly spearheaded by the state, but the town got a bite at the apple with the community host agreements. And at the time, we were advised that the way to go about approving these applications was first come, first serve. And what we have found since is that first come, first serve does not address equity. And we have been told by the state that they were going to take steps to ensure that equity applicants would be considered, but we didn't really see that. And so here we are. And as the select board over the past year has approved the last 2 marijuana retailer licenses, there's growing concern on this select board that we're not doing what the intent of legalizing recreational marijuana is, and that is to address some of the systemic problems with the fact that it was illegal for so long and how it has impacted certain populations, especially in the US. So one of the things that came up during our conversations as to whether or not to approve the last 2 licenses was, what are we going to do about it? And so the proposal is, we are seeking permission from town meeting to add 2 additional nice to have, but not required, licenses that would allow the select board, should an equity applicant apply and meet our requirements, we would be able to license them in the town of Brookline. And I'm happy to go into as much detail as I know. I don't do this for a living, so I can only speak to my firsthand experience and some of the stuff that I remember reading over the past couple of years serving on the select board. So I will end there and see if there are any questions.
If you have a question, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll put something in the chat, and I don't see anything in the chat right now. Yes, let's see. Richard Strock.
Yes. Hi, good morning, everybody. Hi, Heather. How are you?
Good.
About
Good.
the
I would.
sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was wondering, I guess, a couple things here. I've been following this pretty closely. I think, as you know, I've been into a few select board meetings and so forth. What I'm trying to understand is this. So I fully appreciate this is a rapidly, this is a rapidly evolving industry. This is new to all of us, and I hate to use this term because it's been used so much. But we're building the plane as we fly it here. And I can appreciate that there have been some missteps along the way, or things have maybe not, as you said, unfolded the way we had hoped or expected. And there are many, entities that are having to coordinate to make this happen. So my concern here is twofold. Number one, I completely appreciate the need for social equity, and that's such an important, issue these days on many fronts. What I'm concerned about here from an equity standpoint is there's increasing evidence that we know very little bit about marijuana from a health standpoint because it hasn't been studied. It's been a controlled substance for so long. And I would remind everyone, this is still illegal federally. We basically have been allowed, the federal government has said, look, we're going to look the other way on this, and states can legalize, but it's still federally a controlled substance. And so there's not a lot of research, but it's beginning to come out that there is a real damaging effect, especially to the marijuana, which today is much stronger than it used to be. So my concern, if you could speak to two points here. Number one, from an equity standpoint, yes, this is vitally important, but we are lifting up one group, it seems to me, at the risk to another, and that is the kids. And so I wonder if you could speak a little bit to what the select board has done to look into and ensure that by giving, that at the same time we're not giving to one group, we're not taking away from another. I'm really concerned about that. The other thing is this, and like you, I've kind of come into this a little later and I'm still trying to learn about it, but if I understand correctly, the engine driving social equity policy is fundamentally been formulated at the state level. And then Brookline is piggybacking on top of that. In other words, that's what informs how social equity licenses will be applied. And then Brookline has another policy that you've just approved that is kind of layered over that, or that it kind of works to kind of activate that in the Brookline community. My first read on this, and again, apologies if I've got this wrong though, is that the bars are not, the system hasn't been vetted for good fidelity. For instance, if I understand correctly, and apologies if I've got this wrong, someone could apply as a social equity applicant, and the only requirement might be that they've had a drug, they have a certain status as either having, I guess, a case pending, or they had a drug conviction. I don't remember the exact legal standard, but that essentially this might kind of play out. A wealthy white person in an affluent community who's been touched by drug litigation could come and apply for a social equity license and qualify. And I've asked some questions about whether these standards are the starting point. In other words, whether there would be more analysis beyond that, or is that sufficient? Is that it? So to recap, the two questions are kind of, what has the select board done to make sure that we're not oppressing one group while lifting up another? And also, has this really been vetted to make sure that these licenses are going to do what they're intended to do?
Good questions.
Sorry
I'll
for
try
the
to.
long.
Yeah, I'm glad that you recapped, because I had kind of
Yeah.
forgotten your first question by the time you had gotten through your second.
I know.
So the first question, I believe that we have started to hire up in our health department to address a lot of the issues that come with regulating controlled substances. I think that there is money that we get from the retailers that we can then choose to spend however we wish. Now, there's a cannabis mitigation advisory committee chaired by Miriam Ashkenazi, one of my colleagues, and I believe it was intended that their charge include recommendations on how to spend that money. The schools, I think, are a great place to spend some of that money on education. To my knowledge, that's the number one way to get kids not to use either cigarettes, alcohol, or in this case now marijuana. However, we have to work in conjunction with the school committee, because the select board does not have ultimate control over schools and school programming. So I would have to work with my colleagues over there, but I believe that that would be a great intended use for those funds. The second point, I've started to hear some criticism over the way that either the state has defined equity applicants or the way the select board has defined equity applicants. What you're describing, I think, very well may be the way that it is written in the policies now. I hope that these are fluid. We continue to revise them every 1 or 2 years. We have to approve every single license holder once a year. And I think that going into license approvals, we now go through the policy that we have to judge those by. So yes, Melissa Goff just posted our equity policy that we reviewed, I think, a couple weeks ago. So, you know, it is like trying to build the plane while you're flying it. I'm comfortable, and I realize that not everyone is, with doing it, evaluating, and making changes.
Selectman Skoyak, do you have anything you want to add? You need to unmute.
Thanks, Betsy. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I just a couple of points. I do want people to not lose focus on the fact that legalization was sought by the voters of Brookline in a referendum. Legalization has been implemented in Brookline and has resulted in there being 4 retail establishments that are owned by multi-state corporations. No one would be happier to see us suddenly start to retreat from the whole, entry into allowing retail marijuana sales in Brookline. No one would be happier to see us retreat from that than the multi-state corporations that have the 4 licenses that exist in Brookline. If we're going to correct a mistake that was made, and it was a mistake, and it was a combination of a state policy that was not clearly enunciated and clearly delivered to municipalities, and also the the almost irresistible force of these multi-state corporations who have a lot of influence and a lot of ability and a lot of reach in terms of being first in line to get the retail licenses that have been issued in Brookline. But it was a mistake that is correctable, and it was a mistake that needs to be corrected for the most important of reasons. We haven't yet used the legalization of retail marijuana in Brookline to address the punishment and the pain that was felt in disadvantaged communities. And the way to do it is to give people from those communities entree into this business. And it's not much that we're asking for. 2 local licenses to be added to the 4, specifically set aside for equity applicants. Now, a lot of questions can be raised about equity applicants, but we work out ways to define equity in all kinds of situations. You know, there's efforts underway all the time to make sure that when we let out contracts to vendors and service providers, that we recognize equity in the issuing of those contracts and the sharing of those monies. And we're going to do the same thing once we get the approval of town meeting to have a couple of equity licenses for marijuana retail operations. But we can do this, and the time has come to do that, to face the reality that we haven't finished the job where legalization of marijuana is concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Renskoy.
I'll just add that this is up to, so an equity applicant applies for, and the select board has the sole discretion as to whether or to award or not. We are not compelled like we were with the other 4.
Okay, let's move on to the next warrant article. And the petitioner is town meeting member Susan Park. Susan, you may have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, good morning. My name is Susan Park. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 2. And thank you, Betsy and Ernie, for having us here this morning. Warrant Article 8 is about a sensible marijuana policy for Brookline, and my co-petitioners are listed below. So a little background on Warrant Article 8. The current town bylaw 8.37.4 regulates the issuance of basically 4 license types. A, storefront marijuana retailers, B, marijuana delivery operators, C, social consumption marijuana retailers, and D, marijuana couriers. The maximum number of licenses made available to each operator is capped at 20% of the number of off-premises liquor licenses that have been issued by the town. So when the calculation yields a fraction, the requirement is to round up. And again, I just want to remind our audience that whenever you do the calculation, it's always rounded up. An example of this currently is that in Brookline, right now we have 19 off-premises liquor licenses that have been issued. Because 20% of that number is 3.8, the town is required to round up and offer 4 licenses in each of the categories described above. And I do want to note that all fractions, even when less than 1/2, are also rounded up. So despite convention, if when you do that 20% math and you have a value of 3.1, 3.2, you still would round up to 4, not 3. So the amended language is what you see in front of you, and the old language is striked out and the new language is in bold and underlined. So I won't read that first paragraph again, but I'll just read the new language. In the event that 20% of the number of off-premises liquor licenses is a fraction, the fraction shall be rounded down. Also, what's important is that this section 8.37.4 as amended shall not affect the validity of licenses outstanding as of its effective date under state law, including Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 94(6), Section 3A, 2II, and 3E. I wanted to be crystal clear, have some figures on the slideshow so everyone knows exactly what we're talking about. And for example, the number of cannabis stores per category based upon 20% of off-premise liquor licenses, here's the breakdown. If right now we have 19 off-premise liquor licenses, you do the 20% math, it comes out to 3.8. So we have to round up to 4. If Warrant Article 8 passes at town meeting, which would then also go on to the polls, we would round down to 3. So the difference would be 1. With 20 off-premise liquor licenses, the 20% is 4. There's no fraction, so we wouldn't have to do anything there. If we have two more off-premise liquor licenses, and that would be 21, the 20% math comes out to 4.2. We would round up to 5, bumping up the 4 licenses to 5. But if we were to round down, if Warrant Article 8 were to pass, we would round down to 4 and stay where we are. And the last example is 24 off-premise liquor licenses. You do the math, it's 4.8, rounds up to 5, or you would round down to 4. So the path to success with Warrant Article 8 is if it passes at town meeting, it could go on to the polls and pass at the polls. Now, the purpose and intent of Warrant Article 8 is realizing that these licenses are coming into Brookline very quickly. And I think over the summer, there were 2 licenses that were issued for Mission and Canna back-to-back on Commonwealth, right by BU University, just blocks away. So Warrant Article 8 allows us to slow down a little bit. And I think it was former Select Board Chair Neil Wyshynski who even said that he regrets, issuing these licenses so quickly. And so Warrant Article 8 basically just allows us to slow down. We're not taking any licenses away. We're not doing any of that. We're not relitigating. All we're doing is just saying, let's pause and look at the data. And so what we're seeing in the past year, in 2021 alone, new studies have come out via JAMA, via NIH. They're linking cannabis use to self-harm, mortality, suicide ideation in young adults. A host of other concerning health risks are already beginning to emerge. And I want to just highlight that word beginning. But it will be years before we fully understand the risk associated with marijuana use. And rounding down helps manage that risk today. And I just want to stop here just for a second and say, just even 5 years ago, we didn't have the data that 1 in 6 kids are getting addicted. We didn't have this new data that the THC levels have increased by 5%. We didn't know that, with more stores, there's greater access. So with all this new information, it was former select board member, he basically told me that, when we get new information, we are incumbent to reassess. And that's what Warrant Article 8 is doing. It's not taking anything away. It's just we're seeing this new information emerge and we're taking it seriously. We're not going to ignore it. We're not afraid to turn, to disregard it and sweep it under the rug because we've made decisions. We're taking the new information and we're going to look at it. So a little bit about the effects of cannabis on gray matter. And I just told you that 1 in 6 kids are getting addicted. And, you know, that's a stark realization. And basically you see the difference of gray matter on non-users, regular users, and exclusive regular users. And basically the importance of gray matter, it includes regions of the brain that involve muscle control, sensory perception, such as seeing, hearing, memory, emotions, speech, decision-making, and self-control. And with the increase of use, that there's a decrease in that gray matter. And once again, you know, we as citizens and as community members, you know, when we see that 4 licenses have already been given and 8 delivery licenses have already been given, and we're seeing this new research, then once again, this is important as we move forward. I want to talk a little bit about voter confusion. When Brookline residents voted to legalize marijuana in 2016, many were unaware that they were also voting to authorize retail sales in our towns and near our schools. They also didn't realize the level of control they were giving up with respect to licensing. And, you know, I've taken surveys and just been asking around, and a lot of people say, yeah, I wanted to decriminalize, I wanted to legalize, but I had no idea the fine print. I had no idea that we were going to have this many stores within 4 miles, all in North Brookline. And so Warrant Article 8 basically allows voters to have the choice to round down. And the choice to round down it's a compromise. You know, it's, again, nothing is being taken away. All it's doing is allowing us to amend language to round down. So especially for the people who voted not knowing what they were really voting on. So how does Warrant Article 8 relate to Warrant Article 7? The Select Board's Warrant Article 7 potentially creates 2 more storefront businesses in the name of social equity on top of the 4 stores and 8 delivery operations already licensed. Warrant Article 7 raises the number of marijuana storefront businesses to 50% over the legal cap. Warrant Article 8 helps offset this gain. And I want to talk just a little about social equity, as you've just heard Select Board Chair Hamilton and Van Scoyac talk about social equity and the importance to make it right. But I also agree with the people in our audience who are saying not on the backs of our children. Okay, like we all make mistakes, but we have to think about the trade-off, and not on the backs of our kids. A recent study shows that cannabis use disproportionately harms mixed race, Black and Indigenous populations. It increased, and there's increased access. It puts the most vulnerable at risk. So if these studies, you know, are saying that Black, Indigenous, mixed race are the ones who are disproportionately harmed, and they're the most at risk, it doesn't look good that, you know, you're handing out 2 more licenses, but then there's going to be more problems down the road. So Warrant Article 8, it's about slowing down. It gives us this ability to just slow down. BPEN is the Brookline Parent Education Network, and they work with students from Brookline High School who have addiction problems. And I've reached out to them, and Mary, who's the director there, she does student surveys, and she has confirmed, and she showed up at this subcommittee meeting for Select Board for Warrant Article 8, and she basically said, yes, it is true. Reduced risk perception is evident. In other words, what does that mean? Our students do not see the dangers in cannabis because of the big cannabis narrative that is being circulated that is false. 1 in 6 kids are getting addicted. So with this reduced risk perception and increased access with more stores and 8 dispensaries, how is that setting up our future generation, our children? Increased use will definitely be in our community. Is this what our community wants? And I say that with research from RAND that just came out January 21. They came up with a study in 2019, but now they have a secondary one that confirms and strengthens the research even more, saying yes, with more cannabis stores and advertising, there will be increased use. So the data's there. I want to bring up Justin Bieber.
Go ahead. Go ahead. One more. We need to move
Okay.
on.
Okay, thank you. I just want to bring up Justin Bieber, and he's a popular singer. Kids love this guy, but he has this great song called Peaches. And you all probably heard this song. It goes like this. You get your peaches from Georgia. You know, it's always on the radio. He's just partnered now with Meta, and they're launching his Peaches, which are pre-rolled joints. And so everyone knows now that you're going to get these Peaches pre-rolled joints at Neta, and even Select Board Bernard Green at the last meeting, he agreed that this is appealing to children. So we've got to stay on top of this. And Warrant Article 8 just allows us to, look at this carefully, slow us down, make those adjustments. So I hope that you will vote yes on Warrant Article 8, no on Warrant Article 7, and yes on Warrant Article 9, as my colleague Alok will be speaking on next. So thank you very much for having me.
All right, I have there are a couple of questions, and I'm going to consolidate them, but I have one of my own too. But what I'd love to know is how we can track the regulations that limit sales to age 21 and limit the quantity of each sale to what you're describing as statistics having to do with youth under age 21 access and addiction. Can you explain any of that?
If I'm understanding your question correctly,
I'm talking about who has access legally and how does it get to the population you've been identifying as having addiction?
so in your description before we started this, you said that 21-year-olds get access, correct?
Correct, but that's not high school kids.
Susan, can I take a crack at this? Because Betsy, if I understand your question correctly, and I understand that some people believe that students in high schools are going to use marijuana regardless of whether retail stores are in our community or not. And so the question, you've asked a really good question, and we've asked that question of the new analyst that Heather mentioned in the Department of Public Health. And he said that is absolutely one of the areas that they would like to study. They're not sure where access is coming from, and there's some hypotheses on this. And one hypothesis is that older siblings might be providing it, very similar to the way alcohol might have been provided to underage people. So the answer is we don't know, and studies need to be done, and we need to figure that out. And black market use in Colorado and in California, where marijuana has also been decriminalized well ahead of Massachusetts, the studies that are emerging, the data is starting to show that the black market still exists. And it exists because black market marijuana is actually less expensive than legal marijuana. And that's where a lot of the supply is coming from, specifically in the Los Angeles area. So great question. We don't know the answer to that, but it's certainly something that it would be really good to understand. And that's one of the reasons why we should slow down.
Okay, but just to be absolutely clear, you still have not been able to identify how the limitations that are in existence in Massachusetts have been broken or exploited in other ways other than possibly illegal sales or illegal production.
So
it's not necessarily through legal sales.
yeah, I mean, I guess I have been getting emails from parents who had kids who went to BHS who said that their daughter got edibles from the courtyard. You know, like she got edibles from people who are over 21, and then they come to the high school and they sell. And
Okay,
sadly,
so you're talking about dealers then who have access and who have access to underage or under age 21. That's the kind of question answer I was looking for.
okay, thank you.
Where is the link? If
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a little bit more. Yeah, and it's unfortunate. This mom, she was saying her daughter got a bad edible from someone over 21 at the high school, and then she was hospitalized for 6 months. And they were lucky enough to have insurance to cover that. But not everyone has the money for hospital bills like that. And then someone else did email and said that they think their child is getting it from students who have medical marijuana cards as well, and they sell it and then they share it or they sell it.
All right, well, then you're describing what some of the access could be. Okay, so we have some hands up. Arden Reamer, you haven't spoken.
Thank you. And hi, Arden Reamer, town meeting member, precinct 8. And I want to thank the League of Women Voters for holding these information sessions on Fridays. I want to thank Heather for her presentation and Susan as well. They were really, really great presentations. And I'm sorry that I don't have any questions for the two of them, but actually this is for Select Board Member John Van Scoyac. I just want to make sure that the information you're putting out there is accurate, because living in precinct 8, where we have one current retail marijuana shop, Mission, and we will be getting a second one. I actually attended the select board meetings where the family-owned business, the family that owns Mission, presented, and many of their diverse employees from their previous business presented. So John, I'm a little confused as to why you referred to the 4 retail marijuana shops currently in Brookline as interstate corporations or interstate businesses, because when I saw the presentations and the presentation for the select board, I understood Mission to be a family-owned business with diverse employees. At least that's what they were presenting at the time. So I just want to make sure the information you're putting out there is correct and accurate. Thank you.
Thanks, Arden. Yes, it is correct and accurate. You're describing a situation, and by the way, I have no problem with the current license holders. If I had had a problem with them, I would have voted against them getting a license. And Mission is a perfect example. There is an ownership or a management of Mission that is identified with an individual who had Brookline roots and who has employed people from the area and who has relatives who work in the company. But that's not the same thing as, because this is a multi-state operator. It's a multi-state operator that happens to have engaged people at the local level. And we're all for that. And guess what? The select board exercised as much pressure as we possibly could. We leaned pretty hard on the multi-state operators who came to us because they got first in line and wanted to operate retail in Brookline. And we leaned on them hard. Who, if anybody, is on your organizational chart here that is from Brookline in management positions, and not just in management positions, but also throughout the organization. What is the equity representation? What is the diversity representation? What is the representation on the board of your company? And these companies, not to put down hedge funds, but this is a big deal. You know, marijuana. It's not something that is happening in a vacuum. It's happening, you know, in the context of investment by hedge funds, creation of multi-state corporations that compete with each other. And so that just happens to be the reality behind the 4 licenses we've granted so far. There's a big difference between that and an operator who comes from the community. I'll compare it to convenience stores. I think we're all, you know, kind of familiar with the reality that convenience stores are a point of entree into local entrepreneurship for a lot of people from minority communities. We just want the same thing to happen with a couple of the licenses in Brookline. We want them to go to people who don't have access to, you know, the kind of money that hedge fund invested companies have. And we don't want it to be just a multi-state corporation that has, cherry-picked a few people who are local representatives because that's good business for them. I'm for that, but that isn't the same thing as what we're seeking with these equity applicants.
Thank you, Mr. Van Scoyac. Now I think we need to move on. We can take some questions later, but we still have one more warrant article to discuss. George White, can you hold your comment or do you need to speak now?
No, it actually is perhaps more relevant to the last.
Okay, then Alok, you have the floor. Please undertake to explain to us warrant article 9.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Is that, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Oh, terrific. Okay. Hi, my name is Alok. I live in Precinct 5. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us here today. I am also an at-large member of the advisory committee, and I am also a member of the audit committee. And I also have 2 teenage children. Along with Susan Park, I'm the co-petitioner for warrant article number 9. And I'll start by sharing why we wrote the article and then what our objectives are. And then I'll share some thoughts as to why we should pause licensing and first allow a diverse study committee to consider our policy goals. We wrote this warrant article because we feel like there are many people in town who are thinking, look, we legalized marijuana to get rid of the black market and to break this downward cycle that starts with arrest for possession of small quantities of marijuana. This is the decriminalization. We've done that. The state has legalized it. We've decriminalized marijuana. We now have 4 retail stores. Adult access to recreational marijuana in this town is guaranteed. And so that's great. And so the question we're now asking ourselves is, but wait, do we really need a store on every street corner? So our objective with warrant article 9 is to just say, look, let's slow down. And Heather said it herself, we're building the plane as we're flying it. Well, we don't need to build this plane while we're flying it. We can slow down. We can think about, as a town with a diverse set of voices, we can think about what should our policy framework really be, and what bylaw changes are needed in order to implement that. And when we have that policy framework, then we can carry on with the licensing plan. The tax revenue that Brookline receives from the 4 shops that are currently licensed was about $1 million in fiscal year 21. And we've also received $1.3 million in fiscal year 21 from these host community agreements that each licensee signs. And most people will say, oh, that's a lot of money. But is it really? By reference, our fiscal year 21 budget for the town was $350 million. So what we're receiving represents less than 0.6% of our annual budget. And it also brings with it costs. The fiscal year 21 budget had about $1 million of costs identified with implementing the marijuana licenses. So the 4 licenses we have are roughly net neutral. And if we issue 2 new licenses, are we sure that tax revenue will increase? How do we know that the market isn't already saturated and the only result will be 6 stores fighting for market share? And John, to your point, I'm not sure how 2 possibly not well-funded new stores, new licensees will compete against these large multi-state entities that are worth billions of dollars, as we've seen. That is valued at over $1.5 billion. So really, what is the rush to issue these 2 new licenses? And that's the question we're asking, and that's why we are putting forth warrant article number 9 for consideration. The select board says it's to address social equity. But the 2 new licenses, using the policy framework that's been posted on this chat site, probably won't deliver on that social equity promise. So why wait? I've talked about why rush, and I don't think there's a real strong reason to rush. But why wait? Well, there are a few reasons to why we should wait. One is, we can issue new licenses at any point in time. And ideally with a plan, let's not build this plane while we're flying it. Let's actually have a plan that's going to deliver on this social equity promise. Plus, we gain the time, as Susan has pointed out, to understand the emerging data from studies that were only, by the way, only able to launch after recreational marijuana was legalized. And so that's why these studies are new and the data is new. And we should incorporate that into our thinking. As we mentioned, I think earlier this week, we spoke with the new health data analyst at DPH. DPH does have some data from the high schools, which they are analyzing. They would also like to establish baselines for the 18 to 21 population and the middle school. And they need time to review the literature. And they also said that, underlining Heather's point, education is a really, really important component of working with our underage population. But there's no educational framework at the moment. So we need time to develop that educational framework and put that into action. There are also many parents who have legitimate concerns about the normalization of marijuana and how it's going to affect use in the high schools and middle schools. We talked about how teenagers, they're going to use marijuana, whether it's legal or not legal. But Betsy made the great point, which is, well, how is the availability actually happening? And Susan has shared some of what we're hearing, but the truth is we actually do need to do a study. We need to understand where the sources are and how we should, as a society, as a community, manage that. So one other thing I want to just point out is I received a flyer in the mail from Lantern. I don't know if anyone else has received this, advertising home delivery of marijuana. Imagine had that been from Marlboro pushing cigarettes. Let's not forget the lessons we learned from fighting big tobacco. And so the question that we should be asking ourselves, and this study committee should also consider, is should we be applying the same framework to marijuana that we apply to tobacco? There literally is no reason to rush into 2 new licenses. As a community, we should have this conversation. We should have a diversity of views represented, not just people who are prioritizing community health, people who've experienced the tragedy of addiction, health professionals, those people who know how to design and implement effective education programs, people who want to deliver social equity. All these voices should be at the table. We should talk about this and really balance our priorities and have a plan. If we really care about social equity, the last question I want to leave you with is, why are 2 new marijuana licenses the chosen vehicle? And by the way, John, I think you've mentioned this before, which is the #1 barrier to entry, and this is for many businesses, not just marijuana, but particularly here in the marijuana business, is lack of access to capital. And the policy as passed by the select board does not address this. So what can we imagine? We can imagine that applicants apply, but they don't have the capital. How is this actually going to work? So if we want to address social equity, maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's some other ways. For example, maybe we can give this task to the Economic Development Advisory Board. Or maybe the select board could sponsor a program to connect minority entrepreneurs with mentors and investors who reside here in Brookline. There really is no need for 2 new licenses to achieve our social equity goals. So Warrant Article 9 is asking the community to please, let's slow down. We have 4, access is guaranteed. Let's form a diverse study group. Let's really think this through. Please vote yes on Warrant Article 9.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Alok. Okay, now, George, you had a comment you wanted to make, and then John Van Scoik wants to respond.
Sure. George Abbott White, town meeting member, Precinct 9, and president of the Town Meeting Members Association. I'm so glad that this is being done, this gathering, and I'm so glad that it's recorded. I listened to everybody. I'm racing along to take notes from Alok. I think he said so many good things. Betsy, you've raised great questions. And here's my comment. A half century ago, when I started school teaching and tutoring at Harvard, a half century ago, I spent a lot of time with kids who were having troubles with drugs. And from, I think, probably 1970, 1973, I also worked with an Upward Bound program at Lowell High and Groton School, where kids were really having a terrible time of it. As it happened, there was research being done by someone in our community, Lester Grinspoon. Some of you may have heard about him, but he did the pioneer studies on addiction with amphetamines, speed, but also he wrote a terrific book, a careful, thoughtful book on marijuana. And the reason my comment is this, in terms of studying and slowing things down, we do have new data. There are seeds of this in Dr. Grinspoon's study 50 years ago, his publications, but nothing like what we're seeing now, because we have, now it's out in the open, as several of you have said. Now it's out in the open. And the thing is that he anticipated some of the very negative effects, particularly with the youngest people. So I think we need to look at what's happened in that time frame, and I think the fact that so much money is involved in this stuff now. It's good on the one hand, I think, that materials that are available are that it's licensed, and that there's issues of purity, and that you know, you're not dealing entirely with stuff in the back door. On the other hand, and I think several of us have thought about this, availability is not chopped liver. The fact that more of it is out there more easily doesn't mean that fewer people are going to take it. And the issue of normalization, I am in some contact with the high school through the newspaper, and the kids are very, very sharp on a number of things, on gun control, on COVID. I'm not sure that they're very keen on what's going down in terms of various studies with dope, with marijuana. So anyway, I'm really glad this is done. I'm really glad, Betsy, it's recorded. People need to listen to the whole range of comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, John Van Squack, you want to respond? Maybe, yes?
John?
Yes. I want to correct something I said, and I apologize to folks that I need to come back and just correct something. You know, Arden, thank you for your question once again. And it required me to flip through my mental index of the various licensee applicants that we dealt with. And I ended up speaking to my recollection of Mission, the Mission applicant, which I described as a multi-state corporation, and it is. The Hauk family applicant was the final one that we approved. And it's the one that is known as ComApp Canna, and Arden is perfectly correct that it is a family-owned operation. It did not come in under the you know, rubric of equity applicant. You know, came in under the category of general applicant, and it's an applicant that I think Brookline can be proud of having, but it was also, I have to say, you know, opposed by some of the same people and for some of the same reasons, that there are people who are uncomfortable with marijuana legalization, generally speaking. Yeah. And that's fine. I mean, we should continue to listen to all of those voices, and we should continue to listen to the latest research on this. But I hope no one gets the impression from this discussion today that these concerns will go away if we simply deny two potential future equity applicants the chance to access this part of the economy. There's going to be more applicants outside of Brookline, and the same problems that existed 60 years ago when I was a teenager, of teenagers getting their hands on marijuana, yes, will continue to exist, and we need to address them. But I don't think we address them by trying to essentially stop what has been approved by voters just when we get to the point of trying to allow a couple of small scale individuals and small scale licensees to gain some access to what has formerly been, up to this point, been dominated by much larger scale and in many cases non-diverse applicants.
Thank you. And Mr. Struck, you have some more thoughts, comments?
Oops, sorry.
I think you're muted, or at least I can't hear you.
I apologize. My headset wasn't all the way in. Is that better?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, in listening to this, a number of concerns or thoughts have come up, and I'll try to be brief. One, I think a huge take home I got from this, to come back to it, was, the board is saying, yeah, we admit we don't have this fully figured out yet. And I think right there, that should be full stop. We already got in trouble with our policy by not having it fully figured out before we went forward. So I don't think anyone's saying here there's definitely not a place for 2 more social equity licenses. They say, let's not put the cart before the buggy. Okay, act in haste, repent in leisure. I think that's number one. I really think, and I appreciated some of the comments that George had. I think it's really important to remember how much money is behind this legalization of marijuana. I put something up in chat. I haven't read it fully, so apologies. But I have increasingly learned that there was a huge PR campaign to come up with a social justice narrative to push through this legislation. Where there is big money, there is corruption and deception, and how we understand things in this world is a fraught issue. And so I really think we need to at least be very suspicious of the narrative we're being sold here, hook, line, and sinker. These people have at least a conflict of interest, huge business making a lot of money. And I think we should be very careful and not just take at face value the comment that with legalization comes social justice. There's been strong evidence that the only people it's benefited so far have been white people who are wealthy. And so I think we need to, again, understand that before we're going to go to town on that. The other thing I would say is the whole legalization of marijuana was supposed to be a social justice initiative. That should have been the lion's share of the work here. These are incremental gains at best on top of that simultaneously create tremendous risk for our youth. And I think that if we want to create social justice, let's create social justice for people. There are many, many ways we can do that without having to take a risk here. And I will just finally say that as someone who's living in the shadow of these things, it is not harmless. We can't sit on our couch on a Sunday morning without marijuana smoke wafting into our apartment. We can't walk down the street without breathing it in. The police don't enforce it. I mean, I don't want to actually take them to task. I don't know if it's possible. I've gone looking for police when I walk by gangs of 15, 16-year-olds smoking pot in public. No one cares. We never tolerate that with an open container. The police would be all over it. So I just think this is, it's not what it seems. And we need to stop and look. I don't think this does what it says it's going to do. And I really worry about the risk we're taking. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. And thank you again for hearing me.
Thank you. Heather, would you like to wrap at all? Do you have a final comment?
Not really. Well, okay, I guess that's not true. I will just say that, in I think it was December, it was the fall town meeting of 2019. We considered almost all of this stuff with a special town meeting. I believe there were 3 warrant articles I don't exactly remember. Oh, the first one was to limit the operating hours. The second one was about appointment only. And then the third one was a moratorium. And town meeting weighed in. And mind you, in 2019, when we were all still doing stuff in person and Neta was like the only game in town, people were very upset about this issue. And that failed a town meeting. Those three, well, except for the operating hour reduction. So I just, I will be interested to see how town meeting deals with these current warrant articles.
Thank you.
Betsy, sorry.
I'll like one more quick comment, then I think we're wrapping up.
I just need to very quickly respond to what Heather just said about the special town meeting in 2019. I was doing that research as well, and there was warrant article number 3 at that special town meeting, which asked for the select board to not issue any new licenses until a committee was able to be formed and make some recommendations, and the recommendations were supposed to be delivered by March 1st, 2020. Which, as you know, is right at the same time the pandemic was starting. That was actually passed by the town meeting members. That did not fail. The one that failed was the one that was calling for appointment only. And I don't know what happened to that recommendation. I was going to do that research after this call.
Okay, well, I think there's more to come and much discussion, and I'm sure this will get plenty of attention at town meeting in November. So I appreciate, thank you all. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, John. Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Alok, for your presentations and other folks for their comments. This is obviously a topic of great breadth and depth. And frankly, I learned something, and I actually been around and heard about this for a long time. So I'm very pleased that we've been able to at least begin the conversation, which I'm sure will continue. So thank you all and farewell.